I thought I was just bringing groceries to my husband's parents to support him. But the moment I stepped onto their porch, everything shattered. I froze, staring at a scene I never imagined could exist. A woman I didn't know, a little boy calling my husband Dad, and a truth so raw it cut deeper than any betrayal. This isn't just a story of deceit, it's a journey through heartbreak, shattered trust, and the painful path toward understanding. If you believe in the power of truth and healing, stay with me. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below, because some stories demand to be heard. If you asked me to describe my life before everything changed, I tell you it was quiet in the best possible way. Not the kind of quiet that feels empty or lonely, but the kind that settles around you like a soft blanket, a place where you can breathe without rushing, where moments stretch just long enough to savor. I found beauty in those spaces between noise and chaos. I found comfort in routine and the gentle order of things. My name is Madeline Greer, and I was a university literature lecturer. For me, words were more than just letters strung together. They were worlds, filled with color, conflict, and a deep understanding of what it meant to be human. I loved the classics, Tolstoy's sprawling stories about love and loss, Dostoevsky's raw dives into the human soul, Woolf's ethereal explorations of time and memory. Their voices echoed through my days and nights, shaping my thoughts and offering a quiet companionship when the rest of the world felt overwhelming. My apartment was a reflection of this love, a small sanctuary perched above the city streets. Tall wooden shelves bowed under the weight of books, their pages softened and yellowed by time and countless readings. The air always carried a hint of cinnamon bread, baking slowly in the oven as I prepared for the week ahead. On early mornings, when the sun was still low, I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea and lose myself in the rustling of pages, the faint golden light spilling across the room. This was my world, deliberate, ordered, full of soft textures and quiet rhythms. And then there was Silas. Silas Greer was everything I was not, and somehow, exactly what I needed. He was a civil engineer, a man whose days were filled with blueprints, numbers, and the tangible certainty of structures. Where I floated in the currents of emotion and language, Silas stood firm on foundations of logic and reason. His mind was sharp, precise, always calculating the perfect angle or load that would keep a bridge standing strong through storms and time. Our marriage was a dance of contrasts. I brought warmth and vulnerability, he brought steadiness and calm. It was a balance that neither of us fully understood at first, but over the years, we wove our lives together into something resilient. The kind of partnership that doesn't need to shout to be heard, where silence speaks volumes, and presence is enough. Our home was a testament to this harmony. Everything had its place, from the carefully arranged books on the shelves to the simple furniture that filled the rooms. Silas rarely spoke without purpose, but when he did, his words were steady and true. I found peace in his quiet presence, the kind of peace that doesn't ask questions but simply offers strength. Every Sunday, Silas would leave early, setting off toward the countryside where his parents lived. Their small wooden house stood at the edge of a village that seemed untouched by time. Fields stretched endlessly, wildflowers bloomed untamed, and the air smelled of earth and rain. It was a world apart from the city's constant hum. I never went with him. It was his ritual, a bond between son and parents, a thread connecting past and present. But I played my part. On Saturday nights, I prepared jars of preserves, pickles, stews, and flaky pastries wrapped carefully in wax paper. It was my way of sending love, of bridging the distance between us. When Silas returned on Sunday evenings, tired but content, he carried stories of the village, his mother's gentle smile, the whispers of neighbors, the slow change of seasons. I listened to him, eager to catch every detail. Those moments were a lifeline, a way for me to feel connected to a world I didn't fully know. But recently, something began to change. Silas grew quieter. His smiles were less frequent, his laughter more muted. I caught him staring out windows, lost in thought, as if waiting for something I couldn't see. When he came home, there was a heaviness in his sighs, a tiredness that no amount of rest seemed to cure. I told myself it was just work. His projects had grown demanding, deadlines that stretched late into the night, calculations that required every ounce of his focus. I wanted to believe that was all. But beneath the surface, an invisible wall was rising between us. It pressed against my chest, filling the spaces where closeness once lived with silence and uncertainty. I watched him more carefully, hoping to understand, hoping to find the man I loved in the shadows he left behind. And yet, the distance only grew. It was a crisp, breezy autumn morning when the idea came to Madeline like a sudden gust of wind, unexpected and impossible to ignore. For weeks, she'd lived in the growing silence between herself and Silas, the increasing distance that stretched across their shared life like an unseen barrier. She had listened to the quiet sighs, watched the faraway looks in his eyes, and swallowed her fears beneath a blanket of routine and hope. But this morning, something inside her shifted. Without a word, without a plan beyond the raw impulse to act, Madeline decided she would visit Silas's parents herself. Not as a guest invited or a daughter-in-law expected, no, she would go quietly, carrying with her the tangible pieces of her love, jars of preserves, stews simmered to perfection, flaky pastries wrapped in parchment. She moved through her apartment with a calm urgency, preparing as if this simple act might somehow mend the fraying edges of her world. Each jar was carefully wiped clean, lids tightened just so, the soft clinking of glass a steady rhythm amid the nervous flutter in her chest. She wrapped the pies with practiced hands, tying the parcels with string as though binding hope itself. The sun had just risen when she slid the bags into the trunk of their old car. The engine purred awake, and as she pulled out of the driveway, a lightness accompanied her, a fragile buoyancy born of the decision to step forward instead of wait. The roads leading to the village twisted and turned beneath her wheels, lined by trees heavy with autumn's fire. Leaves in shades of amber, gold, and crimson danced on the breeze, swirling like sparks in the sunlight. The forest was a tunnel of color and sound, the rustling leaves, the chirping birds, the distant hum of life undisturbed by human worry. As she drove, memories bubbled up, those Sunday nights spent listening to Silas's stories, the way his eyes softened when he spoke of his mother's smile, the simple joy of sharing bits of village life from afar. She smiled to herself, imagining the surprise her visit would bring, the warm welcomes, the laughter over her food. It was a small thing, yes, but in that moment, it felt monumental, a thread reaching across the growing gulf between them. The village appeared as if untouched by time. Narrow dirt roads wound between homes built of weathered wood and stone, gardens bursting with marigolds and wildflowers that spilled over fences like golden flames. The air smelled of earth, rain, and smoke from early morning fires. Madeline pulled her car along the rutted lane and stopped near the familiar gate. The wooden house, framed by carved window shutters and climbing ivy, stood quietly waiting. It was the same house Silas had described so often, a place of memory and roots. She stepped out, the crisp air filling her lungs, and began walking toward the porch, her heart steady with anticipation. And then, the world shifted beneath her feet. There, on the porch bathed in the soft glow of morning light, stood Silas, not alone. Beside him was a woman Madeline had never seen before. Their easy familiarity was punctuated by the presence of a little boy, no more than 5, who ran with abandon to Silas and called him Papa, without hesitation or fear. Madeline froze. She watched, invisible and breathless, as Silas crouched to embrace the child. His hands gently ruffled the boy's hair, his eyes filled with a tenderness she had never seen directed at her. The woman smiled quietly, her expression soft but guarded. The scene unfolded like a silent film of intimacy and love, a love that Madeline realized in that moment was not hers. Her breath faltered. It felt as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. Her knees weakened beneath her, trembling like fragile branches in a storm. Her hands, which had just moments before wrapped gifts with care, now shook uncontrollably. The weight of betrayal settled over her like a heavy fog, blurring the edges of the world. It was no longer a distant fear or whispered suspicion. It was raw and undeniable. This was no cousin dropped in for a visit. No neighborly call. This was a life she had never been meant to see, a life Silas had hidden carefully, protected with silence. Madeline took a step back, her mind racing yet numb. She could not find the words. Confrontation was impossible. The fragile threads of trust that had held them together snapped in that instant. Without looking back, she turned toward her car. Each step felt heavy, each breath sharp. She climbed in and shut the door with a force that echoed the turmoil within. The engine roared to life, but her hands trembled as she steered away. Tears streamed down her face, blurring the road, mingling with the sting of betrayal and heartbreak. She drove through the winding forest roads, the colors of autumn a cruel contrast to the storm raging inside her. The familiar sights became ghosts as the weight of what she had witnessed pressed upon her chest, threatening to crush her. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions with no answers. How long had this been? How had she been so blind? Was any of it real, the stories, the quiet Sundays, the promises whispered in the night? Each mile carried her farther from the village, farther from the man she thought she knew, and deeper into a new, painful reality. In the silence of the car, broken only by the soft hum of the engine and the occasional sob, Madeline's world shifted forever. The city felt different when Madeline returned. The familiar hum of traffic, the muted clatter of footsteps on sidewalks, even the rhythm of rain tapping against the windows, all seemed somehow distant, as if she were moving through a world she no longer belonged to. The apartment that had once been her sanctuary now felt hollow, its shadows deeper and colder. Inside, silence pressed heavily. She sat alone in the living room, the dim light of late afternoon filtering through curtains that she barely noticed. Around her, the books on the shelves stood like sentinels, their presence once a source of comfort now a stark reminder of the truths she could no longer ignore. Images flooded her mind unbidden, fractured moments of the life she thought she shared with Silas. A casual touch that now felt calculated. A sudden absence explained away with a vague excuse. The small lies that had once seemed insignificant, now sharpened into shards of betrayal. She saw him in fragments, the way his eyes would flicker with something unsaid, the times he disappeared without warning, the phone calls hushed as she entered the room. The Sunday dinners she prepared with care, only for him to return late, tired, distracted. Had she been blind? Or had she trusted too fully, choosing hope over suspicion because the alternative was too unbearable? Each memory was a blow, unraveling the fabric of her certainty thread by thread. The man she loved, the life they built together, began to dissolve beneath the weight of questions she could not yet answer. Her own reflection in the mirror startled her. The woman staring back was unfamiliar, eyes wide with shock, lips pressed tight against rising tears. This was no longer the Madeline who woke to the scent of cinnamon bread and the soft rustle of pages. This was a woman adrift, suspended between disbelief and a painful dawning truth. Days passed in a blur. Silas came and went, his presence both constant and elusive. He spoke little, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to see, the tempest raging within her. Madeline found herself retreating into silence, her words caught in her throat. She did not confront him. Not yet. Instead, she resolved to find her own answers, on her own terms. This was her pain, her betrayal, and she would not allow it to be dictated by others' narratives or demands. She needed to understand fully, deeply, before facing the man who shared her bed but now seemed a stranger. Nights were the hardest. The apartment, once a haven, became a gallery of ghosts. Every corner whispered questions, every shadow hid doubts. The books she once adored seemed to mock her, their stories of love and loss a cruel mirror to her own unraveling. She spent hours in the dim light, tracing her fingers over spines of novels, searching for wisdom in the pages. But no story offered comfort. Instead, the silence wrapped around her like a shroud. In those quiet hours, Madeline grappled with a painful paradox, the love that had sustained her and the betrayal that now threatened to undo it. The man who had been her anchor had become a mystery, his motives veiled in secrets. And yet, beneath the ache and confusion, a stubborn resolve grew. She would not let herself be broken without understanding why. She would seek the truth, not in accusations or confrontations, but in clarity and courage. This was the beginning of a journey inward, a reckoning with memory and silence, with love and loss. And it was only just beginning. Several days after the shock that shattered her illusions, Madeline found herself once again navigating the twisting roads that led to the countryside. But this time, she was no longer a wife stepping gingerly into a world she thought she belonged to. She was a stranger, a visitor cloaked in a fabricated identity, armed with questions she wasn't yet ready to voice aloud. She introduced herself as Arden, an architectural researcher drawn to the village by its weathered wooden homes and intricate craftsmanship. It was a flimsy story, a mask she wore not just to shield herself but to grant the courage she lacked. The truth was too raw, too fragile for the early stages of confrontation. As she approached the familiar cottage, the house seemed smaller somehow, the bright marigold softer in the diffused light of early afternoon. Her heart hammered with a mixture of dread and determination. The door opened before she could knock. Standing there was Elise, the woman who had held Silas's child, whose presence had torn through Madeline's world days before. Elise was not the figure Madeline had conjured in her mind. There was no sharpness in her eyes, no bitterness curling at the edges of her smile. Instead, she looked weary, worn by years of responsibilities and unspoken sacrifices. The lines on her face spoke of fatigue, not just physical, but the kind born from emotional endurance. Madeline stepped inside, the door closing softly behind her. The air smelled faintly of baking bread and baby powder, a quiet testament to a life built around a small boy's needs. She noticed toys neatly arranged in a corner, a child's drawing pinned to the wall. The room held a stillness, a gentle maternal calm that softened the edges of pain Madeline carried. Elise gestured toward the kitchen table, and Madeline followed, settling into a worn wooden chair. Elise moved with quiet grace, setting 2 steaming cups of tea between them, the porcelain delicate and chipped with use. For a moment, silence wrapped around them, a fragile pause heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Elise spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I knew this day might come," she said. "I wondered if it would be anger, pain, or something else that brought you here." Madeline nodded, her throat tight. "I loved Silas," Elise continued, "once. Briefly, long before you came into his life. It was a time filled with hope, but also uncertainty. He was different then, and so was I. But life has a way of complicating things." She paused, eyes drifting toward the window. "He's been here," she said simply, "all these years, supporting me and our son, Rowan. Not as a lover, but as a father, a man caught between worlds. He never had the courage to tell you. He feared what it might break." Madeline's fingers trembled around her teacup. The quiet confession unsettled her, not because it contradicted what she had seen, but because it illuminated the shadows behind the silence. Silas had not been unfaithful out of malice or desire, but out of fear and a deep, tangled sense of duty. "We're not together anymore," Elise said, her gaze meeting Madeline's. "Not lovers. Only bound by responsibility, by Rowan, by a shared past neither of us can erase." The truth unfolded slowly over sips of bitter tea. It was neither the final blow nor the comfort Madeline had secretly yearned for. It was something more complex, messy, human, and painfully real. For the first time since that terrible morning, Madeline felt a flicker of clarity amidst the chaos. This was not a simple betrayal. It was a story of love lost and transformed, of choices made in the shadows, and of a man struggling to hold together pieces of a life he never fully dared to share. She sat back, the weight in her chest easing just enough to breathe. There were still so many questions to ask, so much to understand. But in this quiet kitchen, with the soft murmur of village life outside the window, Madeline realized that understanding, perhaps, was the first step towards something she had not yet named, whether it would be forgiveness, acceptance, or something else entirely. When Madeline finally walked through the front door that evening, the weight of unspoken truths pressed heavily against her chest. She did not raise her voice. She did not demand explanations. Instead, she carried a stillness so profound it filled every corner of the room, a calm before the inevitable storm. Silas sat quietly on the worn sofa, the familiar lines of his face etched deeper by worry and regret. His eyes, once a steady harbor, flickered with a fragile hope mingled with fear as she entered. The silence stretched taut between them. Madeline's gaze met his. No anger. No accusation. Just a steady, unblinking expectation that the truth, however painful, would finally be spoken. And speak he did. Silas's voice broke the quiet, halting at first, trembling with the weight of years held too tightly in shadow. It began before you and I ever met, he confessed, eyes fixed on the floor. A fleeting connection, a momentary lapse, but it changed everything. I never meant for it to become this complicated. He told her about the child, how Rowan came into the world as an unexpected responsibility, a fragile life that tethered him to a reality he struggled to balance. He spoke of fear, the fear of losing Madeline, of shattering the life they built, of the impossibility of telling her the whole truth. Silas admitted how he had compartmentalized his existence, building walls to separate the man she knew from the secrets he carried. Walls he foolishly hoped would hold forever, protecting both their worlds from collision. Madeline listened, the stillness around her solid yet breaking beneath the tide of revelation. The man she loved was not the villain she had imagined, but a man fractured by love and fear, trapped between duty and desire. That night, silence became their companion. Their home, once a sanctuary of shared dreams and whispered poems, felt vast and cold. Madeline lay awake on one side of the bed, the spaces between them filled with the echoes of unspoken words. She could not reach out to Silas, not yet. The physical barrier was a reflection of the emotional chasm yawning between them. She did not leave. The choice to stay was not comfort or acceptance, but a fragile act of courage, a willingness to face the wreckage and find a way through it. Inside, her mind was a tempest. Betrayal battled with understanding. Rage surged against the recognition of his humanity and the complexities of the heart. She wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. How do you forgive when the foundation of trust crumbles? Can love survive such fractures? And if it can, what must be sacrificed to rebuild? The night stretched long, heavy with sorrow and unresolved longing. Madeline's world had shattered, yet within the shards, a stubborn glimmer of hope flickered. It was the hope that healing was possible, even if the path was uncertain and steep. Madeline did not hesitate when the time came to leave. The walls of their shared apartment, once a haven, had become stifling, closing in with the weight of secrets and fractured dreams. She packed a modest bag, careful not to take too much, as if shedding her belongings might lighten the burden she carried inside. Without a word, she stepped into the early morning chill and locked the door behind her, shutting out not just a home, but a life unraveling. Her destination was a village miles away, a place tethered to memories of her late aunt, an old cottage left abandoned yet filled with echoes of simpler days. It was a place Madeline had once visited as a child, wandering the forest paths and listening to stories whispered by the wind through the ancient oaks. Now, it called to her like a beacon, a refuge where she might find the space to breathe and begin to piece together the fragments of her broken heart. The drive was long, winding through countryside where fields stretched unbroken under wide, gray skies. Madeline watched the landscape shift, golden meadows giving way to dense woods, rivers curling like silver ribbons through the earth. Nature, indifferent and eternal, seemed a stark contrast to the turmoil roiling inside her. Arriving at the cottage, she felt a strange mixture of comfort and desolation. The wooden structure sagged slightly under the weight of years, ivy clutching its sides with stubborn fingers. Inside, dust motes floated in shafts of light filtering through cracked windows. The air smelled of damp earth and faded memories. Madeline lit a fire in the hearth, the crackling flames a small rebellion against the cold silence. She sank into a worn armchair and pulled out a notebook she had brought along. Words spilled onto the pages, raw and unfiltered, her thoughts, her pain, her questions. Journaling became an exorcism, a way to confront the shadows that haunted her mind. Days passed in a slow rhythm of walking through the surrounding woods, reading worn novels, and writing by the firelight. The forest became her silent therapist, the whisper of leaves and distant bird calls grounding her when the weight of grief threatened to overwhelm. Each step on the soft earth was a small act of healing, a way to reconnect with a self nearly lost beneath betrayal. In the quiet moments between reflection and solitude, Madeline found herself reliving memories with Silas, laughing over shared jokes, the reassuring steadiness of his presence during storms, the quiet partnership forged over years. These recollections shimmered with warmth and truth, reminding her that their life had not been a lie, but a complex tapestry woven from both light and shadow. Yet, juxtaposed against these memories were the stark realities of his hidden life, not born of cruelty or malice, but of fear and cowardice. A man divided, carrying burdens in silence, protecting and deceiving in equal measure. Madeline grappled with this duality, understanding that human hearts are rarely simple or pure. The man she loved had flaws, failures, and a past she could neither erase nor fully comprehend. As days slipped into nights, she found herself confronting questions that had no easy answers. Is love still love when trust shatters beneath its weight? Can care coexist with betrayal? How does one reconcile devotion with deception? She did not seek clarity, not yet. What she sought was honesty with herself, a reckoning stripped of denial and illusion. To acknowledge the pain without allowing it to define her. In the solitude of the cottage, surrounded by the wild quiet of nature, Madeline began to weave together a fragile resolve. She could not undo the past, nor pretend the wounds did not exist. But she could choose how to carry them forward. The path ahead was uncertain, steeped in shadows, but for the first time since the rupture, she felt a flicker of something beyond despair, an ember of hope, fragile but fiercely alive. The drive back to the city was heavy with unspoken words, but Madeline's heart carried a quiet resolve she had not known for weeks. The cottage, the forest, the pages of her journal, all had given her something precious, the space to sift through pain, anger, and confusion and find a fragile seed of clarity. She was not the same woman who had left, she was more cautious, more measured, but also more certain. She did not return with open arms or promises of immediate forgiveness. That was not the path she was willing to take, not yet. But she came with a willingness to rebuild, to begin again, however slowly, from the foundation stripped bare by truth. Silas waited when she stepped into their apartment. The weight of the past weeks hung in the air between them like a storm ready to break. But Madeline's eyes were steady when she spoke. "I haven't forgiven you," she said quietly, "but I'm not leaving." The words fell like stones, heavy and irrevocable. Silas's shoulders sagged, a mixture of relief and pain crossing his features. He reached for her hand, tentative, as if testing whether she might withdraw. "I will earn back every inch of your trust," he whispered. "I don't expect it to be easy. I don't expect it to be quick. But I am ready to try, if you'll let me." Her heart ached at his vulnerability, the raw honesty of a man laid bare by his mistakes. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, to hold on to the fragile hope that they might find a way forward. Days passed, and Madeline's thoughts crystallized into a bold idea, an act both courageous and daunting. If healing was to begin, she would need to face the full complexity of their lives. She suggested they visit Elise and Rowan, together. Silas was stunned. The hesitation in his eyes was unmistakable, the shadows of guilt and fear flickering beneath his calm exterior. Yet, he nodded slowly, recognizing the significance of this gesture. "This is your way of rewriting the ending," he said softly, a trace of gratitude mingling with uncertainty. The morning of the visit was filled with quiet preparation. Madeline baked pastries, her hands steady as she folded dough, filled them with apples and cinnamon, the warm scent filling the kitchen. These offerings were not just food, they were symbols of acceptance, tentative bridges extended across fractured spaces. The drive to Elise's house was slow, the silence between Madeline and Silas filled with thoughts too complex for speech. When they arrived, the wooden gate creaked open, revealing a garden where Rowan played quietly, his small figure framed by dappled sunlight. Elise greeted them with a gracious smile, no bitterness, no accusation, only the weary kindness of someone who had borne her own burdens and carried them with dignity. Madeline felt a tentative peace settle in the space between them. Rowan was shy but curious, peering from behind Elise before stepping forward with the cautious innocence only a child could possess. Madeline knelt down, offering a soft smile and the pastry she carried. There was no confrontation, no recrimination. Instead, there was acknowledgement of the messiness of human lives, of love complicated by secrets and choices, of families bound not just by blood but by shared history and responsibility. In that humble kitchen, surrounded by the aroma of tea and the gentle hum of life, Madeline glimpsed a different kind of healing. It was not the clean, perfect resolution of fairy tales, but a fragile, tentative reconciliation with imperfection. She understood then that love, even fractured, could still hold the power to heal, not by erasing the past, but by embracing it with honesty and courage. The road ahead would be long, filled with challenges and uncertainty, but in this moment, Madeline allowed herself a flicker of hope, that from the ruins of betrayal could rise a new, if fragile, beginning. The car hummed quietly beneath her as Madeline sat behind the wheel, the village fading slowly in the rearview mirror. The road stretched ahead, long, uncertain, and winding, much like the path she now walked within herself. The weight of everything she had seen, heard, and felt pressed gently against her chest, a mixture of sorrow and fragile hope. She looked down at her hands, resting on the steering wheel, worn but steady. They had held love, had baked hope into bread and preserves, had trembled with disbelief and pain. Now, they gripped the wheel with a quiet determination. "You don't erase betrayal with kindness," she thought, her mind echoing the harsh truth she had wrestled with these past weeks. "But sometimes, you can soften its edges with truth." Truth, unvarnished, raw, and honest, was not an easy balm. It cut, it cleansed, and it demanded courage. Madeline knew that forgiving did not mean forgetting. It did not mean pretending the pain never happened or that the fractures had never scarred their foundation. There would be no fairy tale ending for them. No grand declarations of love restored overnight, no sweeping away of the past like footprints in the sand. Life was messier, more complicated, and somehow, more real. But as the miles passed beneath her, a quiet certainty settled in her heart. She was writing a new chapter, not for closure, but for control. A chapter authored by her own choices, guided by her own strength. And in that, she found power. Power not over others, but over herself. Power in the decision to stay, to rebuild, or to walk away. Power in choosing how to carry the wounds and what they would teach her. She glanced at Silas, sitting quietly beside her, his eyes no longer distant but searching, hopeful. There was work to be done, hard conversations, healing, and trust earned anew. But there was also something precious, the possibility of renewal, born not from forgetting, but from facing the truth together. Outside, the world moved on, the trees rustled in the wind, the sun dipped low behind the hills, and life pulsed in endless cycles. Madeline inhaled deeply, the cool air filling her lungs and steadying her spirit. To anyone listening, watching, walking their own path through pain and healing, she wished this: hold tight to your truth, but allow space for kindness, especially for yourself. Because sometimes, healing is not about perfect endings but the courage to write new beginnings. If Madeline's journey touched you, if you see your own story in hers, please consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell. There are more stories here, stories of courage, heartbreak, and hope, that remind us we are never truly alone. Take care of yourselves. Protect your hearts. And remember, healing begins when we give ourselves permission to feel, to question, and ultimately, to grow.